What makes a hero? There's the obvious answer of people that rush into danger, corralling their fear behind a facade of confidence. But what of the unlikely heroes? These are the people that step forward out of a realization that there is no other choice that squares with their morals. They may find themselves called into duty before the heroes arrive, or when the heroes fall. At the St. Elizabeth's Hospital fire, firefighters arrived to find an impossible situation. The first engine had 3 firefighters, and there were dozens of patients trapped in their rooms with bars guarding their windows, preventing escape as the fire tore through the inside of the building. Additional engines and ladder trucks arrived moments later, but even with a second and third and ultimately 4th alarm, those initial firefighters on the scene were facing a monumental task. These are the moments that birth unlikely heroes, average people forced into extraordinary action because there is no other acceptable choice. To stand back and do nothing would be to contribute to the horror they were witnessing. A choice to remain idle would rob them of their peace forever. Today we will talk about some of the unlikely heroes of the St. Elizabeth's fire. But despite the efforts of the heroes, both unlikely and expected, ultimately 41 people would perish. It would be the job of investigators to parse the evidence to explain what had happened. It turns out it wouldn't be as difficult a task as initially thought, because within days, investigators learned that someone had confessed to setting the fire, someone unlikely. Someone pushed to do the unthinkable by unseen forces at work to twist her mind into believing a fallacy. This is the conclusion of the St. Elizabeth's Hospital fire on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
I was once a mere mortal, fascinated by the criminal mind, but now I'm an insatiable zombie, in search of the ultimate brains. The brains of brain nerds. It is my hope that by consuming these brains, I might discover why the living commit these heinous fire crimes.
Please be sure to check out our episode talking about Centralia on the podcast Sasquatch and Sourdough. Links are in the show notes. We have several other collaborations in the works, so follow us on social media, including TikTok, X, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. The best thing you can do for any podcast is to leave a 5-star rating and written review. In addition, on the platforms that allow episode comments, those comments are super helpful. We humbly ask for your help growing our audience through reviews, comments, and of course, interacting with our social media content. The more interaction those reels and clips get, the more people the algorithm will push our content out to, and that helps us grow. You can also follow us on YouTube and subscribe there as well. And if you have a fire story to share, case suggestion, or feedback on our content, you can email us at crimetoburn@gmail.com. And don't forget to check the link in the show notes for our spread shop where you can get merch, including shirts, bags, aprons, stickers, magnets, and more. We would love to see some photos of you repping our merch on social media, so if you get some, make sure to tag us in those photos. And big news this week, Crime to Burn is officially a chart-topping podcast. On Apple Podcasts, no less. We are officially ranked number 178 in the true crime genre on Apple Podcasts in South Africa. So we sincerely thank every one of our listeners in South Africa for getting us onto the Apple Podcast charts for the very first time.
Slow clap.
I have other big news too. Are you ready?
No.
We'd like to welcome North Dakota to the podcast. We had been downloaded in 48 of the states and we're just missing North and South Dakota, but now we are only one state away because somebody in North Dakota has begun listening. So if you know somebody in South Dakota, be sure to send them the podcast, and then we will officially be in all 50 states.
I just wish we had a bigger presence in Guam.
I actually don't know if we have any listeners in Guam, because Guam isn't broken out in the U.S. map. Puerto Rico is, though. Guam is at least as important as Puerto Rico.
And I hear there's at least a couple of people listening in the Philippines.
We do have several people that listen in the Philippines every week. We also have a very loyal contingent of listeners in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine is actually outranking Australia and New Zealand right now in terms of our downloads. All right, as we discussed last week, St. Elizabeth's was an inpatient mental health facility located on the campus of Mercy Hospital in Davenport, Iowa. In the wee hours of the morning on January 7th, 1950, night nurse Anna Neal heard screaming, and when she went to investigate, she found 22-year-old Elnora Epperly locked in her room, a room that was rapidly being consumed by a fire that Elnora had set herself. By the time Neal was able to free Epperly, the fire was already spreading into the dumbwaiter that opened into Epperly's second-floor room, which allowed it unimpeded access to the third and fourth floors. Epperly ran into the room of her friend Marilyn Beals, shouting to wake Beals and instructing her to follow Epperly as she raced to get out of the building. However, for some reason, Beals did not follow Epperly. Epperly did escape the fire after using a chair to break a window near a locked door so she could reach through and unlock it, and on her way out of the building, she tossed the lighter that she had used to ignite the newspaper and curtains in her room into a first-floor parlor. That was the lighter Epperly had given to her husband as a wedding gift, and it had his initials engraved into the silver housing. She had borrowed it from him earlier that day to light her cigarettes that she was permitted to smoke in order to help her cope with the side effects of the insulin shock therapy she was receiving at St. Elizabeth's to treat her schizophrenia. While Elnora was being treated at Mercy Hospital for the cuts she sustained escaping the building, she reportedly talked to someone in a hallway admitting that she had set the fire with a cigarette lighter. However, when the nurse that overheard this conversation reported it to a physician, that doctor happened to be Elnora's psychiatrist, and he assured the nurse that this was a common symptom of Epperly's schizophrenia. She commonly claimed to be responsible for horrific events that occurred around the world that she could have had no impact upon, but it didn't stop her paranoid delusions that everything bad that happened was somehow her fault. Epperly had been scheduled for release later that morning, so when her husband John arrived at the hospital, Elnora was released into his custody while they worked on finding a new facility that might have better luck treating Elnora's schizophrenia, because the doctors at St. Elizabeth's had determined she was not being helped by their therapy. While Elnora was being treated for her wounds, firefighters were fighting an uphill battle against impossible circumstances. The fire had spread to the upper floors so rapidly that the residents of the third and fourth floors were trapped in their rooms by thick black smoke and intense heat of the hallway. In addition, because the dumbwaiter provided a clear pathway for the fire to spread to the upper floors, the fire itself was soon spreading down the hallway on these upper floors, eliminating any hopes of escape through the building to an exit. Even if the hallways hadn't been compromised so early in the fire, the doors to the stairs were locked. So firefighters arrived to a nightmare scene of desperate patients screaming for help from windows that were covered with iron bars. The initial fire crews raced into the building hoping to find opportunities to evacuate patients from the lowest level, only to find that there were no patients housed on that level. They then attempted to make entry to upper levels only to be pushed back by the intense flames. Meanwhile, outside, truck crews struggled to get ladders to the trapped residents, but even once the ladders were placed, there was still the painstaking challenge of removing the iron bars from the windows. Some of the windows did have locking mechanisms that could be opened with a key from the outside, and while the fire department did have a key, it was found that many of the locks could not be coaxed into cooperation. Either age or heat or weather had rendered them inoperable. So firefighters with axes and pry bars pried the bars away from window frames and hacked at the wood that the bolts were secured to in order to free the patients desperate to escape the building. The building had one fire escape, which might have offered at least some of the patients safe passage out of the building. However, as the first fire crews arrived, they realized the fire escape was positioned immediately outside the window of the room that had been occupied by Elnora Epperly, the room of origin of the fire. The flames were already rolling out of the window of that room, already making the fire escape completely impassable eliminating it as a possible exit before most of the residents even awoke from their sleep. The remaining exits were the 2 interior stairwells, which were locked to prevent residents from leaving their floors. The only way out for the residents of the upper floors was to wait for rescuers to reach their windows and begin the painfully slow process of prying the iron bars away from the building to free the terrified patients. Firefighters would recount after the fire horrific scenes of watching patients' faces slip below the sills of the windows as they were overcome by smoke, inches in front of the firefighters' faces as they fought to remove the bars from the windows. Some of the first firefighters into the building that were able to take the stairs up to the 3rd and 4th floors found the doors into the corridors locked. But during their attempts to gain access, night nurse Anna Neal did give them the key to the doors. However, as the paint on the closed side of the doors was already bubbling from the heat, firefighters realized that opening these doors would be futile, as anyone outside of their rooms in the corridor beyond would already be gone. Also, keep in mind, in 1950, firefighters did not have full turnout gear that we have today. They usually had a long rubber coat and tall boots and a helmet. SCBA wasn't common in 1950, and most firefighters had access to something called a smoke mask that was intended to filter the smoke out of the air, but wasn't a self-contained breathing apparatus. So these firefighters were most likely trying to enter a fully involved fire in basically slightly elevated street clothes with nothing more than a respirator. In the book referenced in the show notes, there are no references to SCBA, only to masks, so I do not think that the Davenport Fire Department had any kind of breathing apparatus beyond respirators at this point, even though they had been invented by this point. And recall that inside a fire isn't anything like the movies, where all the firefighters have their faces uncovered and there's lots of light from the fire. And that's because the studios paid too much money to have the hot actors' faces completely covered up during the movie. They paid for the face, they want to see it. But inside a real fire is dark, it can be pitch black, and it is hot, and that water that you're spraying at the fire, a lot of it is turning into steam. And a respirator does nothing to combat low oxygen levels, so interior attack wasn't often as possible then as it is today. So when these firefighters are seeing the blistering paint on the door, that's a sign that it's far too hot for them to risk opening that door and being exposed to that intense heat rolling out towards them. Plus, once you open the door, now the fire has a new ventilation pathway, and it will move toward that pathway. The last thing they wanted to do was draw the fire into the stairwell and give it another vertical path to move through the building. Meanwhile, and the timeline is relatively muddled here in the book includes a lot of first-hand stories, but it doesn't do a very good job of laying out the events in the order in which it happened. And so at the point that the author was getting this information, it was probably an impossible task to try to put it in order, so I'm not criticizing the book. I'm just making it clear why I can't tell you exactly how things happened in order. But it seems that early in the fire, nurse Anna Neal, along with a couple of other nurses that had run over from the hospital, were busy trying to escort as many patients as they could from the 2nd floor out of the building. Now, this had to have been after Anna Neal gave firefighters the keys to the doors to the upper floors, because as they were making rescues from those rooms on the 2nd floor, the 2 nurses that were helping her saw a burst of flames overtake Anna Neal, and she fell. The nurses were unable to reach her, being driven out of the building by the rapidly growing fire. Anna Neal did not survive. She was found in the doorway to Marjorie Beals's room. This was the room that Elnora Epperly had first entered before escaping the hospital. Beals had been her friend, and she told Beals that there was a fire and instructed her to follow Elnora out of the building, which for whatever reason Beals did not do. Beals was also found in her room, and she left behind a son and a husband, and she was to be released that day also. As the first firefighters that had arrived on scene abandoned interior rescue attempts and began the impossible task of freeing the trapped patients from windows, across the campus, nuns in the dormitory also awoke, rushing to the building to try to assist in any rescue efforts they might undertake. But the fire was too intense, driving the sisters away from the building, so they began instead receiving the patients that had been freed from the facility, wrapping them in blankets, attempting to comfort them and soothe them as they escorted them into Mercy Hospital, where they would be triaged and treated for their wounds. One such nurse was a woman named Eileen Cox.
Hey, calm down, lady.
Cox is a perfectly normal last name.
Even if you're leaning on it?
Oh dear God, I didn't think of it that way. I didn't name her, so you can't blame me for this one.
I'm not blaming anyone for anything.
One such nurse was a woman named Eileen Cox. She made an attempt to enter the building, but at this point, firefighters were being driven out of the building by heavy smoke and flames and heat far too intense to risk entry into the 3rd and 4th floors, so she waited outside intending to receive the patients that were freed by the fire department to tend to them. But while she waited, she happened to walk around to the west side of the building. This would have been the back of the building from where the firefighters originally arrived. And she saw a terrifying sight. On this side of the building, there were no fire department ladders yet, and all along the side of the building, Eileen could see the silhouettes of desperate patients backlit by fire screaming for rescue from the windows.
Damn, that's brutal.
But Eileen could do nothing. There were no ladders on the side of the building to use to help rescue these trapped patients. But she did recall that she saw several ladders near the south side of the building. So she ran in that direction. There were firefighters there that were already engaged in rescue operations, and she pleaded with them to come over to the west side of the building, but there just wasn't any spare hands to help. So one of the firefighters shouted to her and said, "Grab a ladder, go." And without a second of hesitation, she did as she was told. The 32-year-old nurse dragged a heavy fire department ladder to the west side of the building, and one firefighter joined her at first. And together, they began the arduous process of positioning the ladder while the firefighter chopped away the bolts holding the bars at the windows in place, prying them back and plucking the residents out of the building, where she would then assist them to the ground and turn them over to the other nurses that had arrived on that side of the building. And then she would help the firefighter relocate the ladder to the next window to make the next rescue, racing against the fire to save as many residents of the hospital as possible. Eileen Cox was one of those unlikely heroes of the night, stepping in to help rescue patients from the west side of the building, throwing fire department ladders and tending to the injured. Now, I don't know how heavy fire department ladders were in 1950, but I can tell you that in 1950, most fire departments were still using wood ladders or wood and steel ladders, according to the Goo Goo Box. When I was going through the fire department training, I was shocked at how heavy the ladders were. These are not your lightweight aluminum house ladders. These are ladders designed to stand up to elevated temperatures, and they were heavy. And from my research, it's most likely that she was dealing with a wood extension ladder, which would have been well over 100 pounds typically. Fun fact. One major metropolitan fire department in the United States still uses handcrafted wooden ladders. Now, the information says they're the only department that still uses custom-made wooden ladders, so I don't know if that means they're the only department that still uses all wooden ladders, or if they're the only ones that make their own wooden ladders.
Is that the same place with the light bulb that's been on forever?
No, I don't know where that is.
I thought it was a firehouse. There's a light bulb that's been on for like...
I vaguely remember that, but I don't know where it was. Wasn't it in Chicago?
It was East Coast somewhere, I don't remember.
Oh. I personally haven't seen any other departments that use wooden ladders, so do you want to try to take a guess which major metropolitan city still uses wooden ladders?
Which one has the greatest population of Amish?
That's not it.
Oh.
It's on the West Coast.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
No clue.
Think Rice-A-Roni.
San Francisco.
San Francisco. They custom make all of their fire department ladders.
Really? Mm-hmm. Is there like a person or a company or?
They have their own carpentry shop that makes them.
Like a fire department carpentry shop?
Yep.
Well, that's fascinating, actually.
I was fascinated by that too.
That's pretty cool. We should go tour that someday.
Someday.
That'd be rad, man. That sounds cool, honestly.
It does. I thought it was a really interesting piece of trivia because when I was on the fire department in Maryland, we didn't have any wooden ladders. We only had metal ladders and some fiberglass ladders for when we had electrical concerns.
Oh, I've never seen a wooden ladder for fire department use, ever. Mm-mm. I didn't even know that was a... It's kind of counterintuitive, right? Like, why would you use a wooden ladder? Doesn't wood burn?
Wood does burn, yes, but it actually, like, you know, it's hard to catch a large piece of wood on fire. Harder to catch a large piece of wood on fire than, like, kindling.
Large pieces of wood are harder to catch on fire.
Good Lord.
You're right.
Okay, back to the story. At the time of the fire, there were 19 patients on the 4th floor of the building. Only 2 would survive. Most of the rescues were made from the 2nd and 3rd stories, as the lowest level, which was a partially sunken basement, was where most of the firefighters initially made entry because the fire was already so intense on the upper floors, but they didn't realize that this level housed only the kitchen and storage rooms. All of the hospital staff that had been on this lowest basement level when the fire began had been able to easily escape because this floor was connected to all the other buildings on campus by underground tunnels. Ultimately, over 100 firefighters plus second alarmers, which were volunteer firefighters that would respond along with local fire departments, plus police, nurses, and even some doctors would make their best attempts to help rescue trapped residents from this inferno. The rescue efforts were drastically slowed by the bars over the windows, which the fire department reportedly did have keys for, but because of the intense flames and the water from the fire hoses, and freezing temperatures or age or whatever, it's reported that many of the windows remained locked and weren't able to be opened even with the keys.
They always paint those things shut.
Yeah, they tend to paint windows shut. I don't know that they paint the bars shut, though.
I don't know. I thought you said windows.
Yeah, I mean, the bars over the windows had locks that some of them did, had locks that the fire department had a key to.
Can you imagine being a firefighter with a giant key ring trying to figure out which one goes to the hydrant, which one goes to the window?
You joke.
I'm not joking. I saw some padlocks on fire hydrants today.
We had a huge ring of keys because we had the keys to all of the fire alarm control panels on campus.
I only ever did rural stuff. There were no keys.
They were well labeled, though.
Nice. But you still got to thumb through them, right?
Well, you're supposed to do that on the way there, really.
Is there a protocol for thumbing keys?
Well, the person in the officer seat is the one that is navigating. They have a map book and everything. And so, yeah, they're navigating you there, and the map book will tell you which ring of keys you need for which buildings. And so you're grabbing that ring of keys.
That's cool. I had no idea.
Yeah, fire departments do pre-plans now. The unlikely heroes that night fought to save these desperate patients right alongside the firefighters, especially in the early stages of the fire. And these were mostly nuns that were serving as nurses at Mercy Hospital, but they didn't hesitate to jump in and try to rescue patients. I'm confident that none of them ever forgot the horrors that they saw that night. Now, in the early morning hours, the local coroner was called to the scene. With the fire reduced to smoking rubble and the partially destroyed outer skeleton of the building all that remained, the gruesome task of finding and identifying the bodies of victims would begin. Ironically, the coroner had only taken this position 6 days prior. Before that, Dr. Wildman, the coroner, was a pharmacist running a pharmacy. I'm not sure why he decided that he wanted to be a coroner, but I'm sure on this night he probably was wishing he'd stayed a pharmacist. But now he was running a temporary morgue along with the county medical examiner, Dr. Rock, out of a training room in Mercy Hospital.
Dr. Rock?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
You know what I didn't tell you, but I should have? One of the first arriving firefighters in the very first engine that arrived, his name was Axelrod. That was his last name.
No way. Hell yeah, Axelrod.
I think it was Philip Axelrod. I have to double check, but I know his last name was Axelrod.
Phil Axelrod.
The tables and chairs had been pushed out of the way in the training room to allow the bodies of the victims to be arranged on the floor so that the arduous task of identification could begin. Many of the victims were burned beyond recognition, and the nuns that had treated the patients and cared for them at St. Elizabeth's were ushered among the bodies to see if they could make out any identifying features. A ring here, a lock of hair there, a scrap of their pajama fabric. Soon, the coroner realized that this was too monumental of a task for one or even 2 people, and he called in 6 local funeral homes to come and receive the bodies that had not yet been identified. As family members arrived, many took part in a morbid parade from funeral home to funeral home where they tried to discern identifying features to locate their people. But the coroner did one absolutely baffling thing. He insisted that each family identifying and claiming a family member sign a form when they claimed the body. The form indicated that the person claiming the body had made a positive identification and was taking claim of the body, and that they were waiving any rights to later disclaim the body. Like, what did he expect? This isn't Walmart. People aren't going to show up with a corpse claiming it turns out they were missing parts and want to exchange it for a new one.
Wait. For some reason, honestly, when you said what he did or whatever, wanted him to sign, it didn't sound weird to me. Like, it sounded like just, we don't want to be responsible really for anything. Like, no matter what. Like, have you never, like, read some disclaimer on the side of a product and been like, how would anyone conceivably even do this? But then you have to consider it must have happened.
But, like, is disclaiming a body a common thing? Because I Googled this, and I couldn't find any results.
Well, it seems like there wouldn't be a need for a disclaimer if it hadn't happened.
Well, the pharmacist turned coroner apparently thought that the grieving families needed some sort of all sales or final paperwork. I don't understand.
Very final. About as final as it gets right there.
All I can think of is, obviously funerals are expensive. Whether you're burying somebody or having them cremated, there's costs associated with it. And maybe they were worried that people would claim a body, realize they didn't have the money to actually bury them, and then try to say, oh, we got the wrong body. Like, maybe.
That's not a bad theory.
That's the only thing I can think of.
Something happened to hurt this person, though, and then they felt like they had to include that. Who hurt you, coroner?
Ultimately, 16 bodies remained unidentified and unclaimed following the fire. Likely because they didn't have family, and some of them were probably the permanent residents of St. Elizabeth's. They were all buried in a small cemetery created on the grounds of Mercy Hospital to receive them into their final resting place just yards away from where they had departed the mortal realm. While Doctors Wildman and Rock were handling the processing and identification of bodies, the only firefighter that was injured fighting the blaze was being treated at Mercy Hospital.
I just put that together. How do you have Doctors Wildman and Rock and not have, like, at least a cover band?
That's a great question. I don't know if they're still alive to ask.
We should dig into this. Maybe they had, like, alter egos and secret lives and, like, underground clubs and...
Maybe. So the only firefighter that was injured in the blaze was being treated in Mercy Hospital for frostbite. He suffered frostbite from getting wet fighting the fire and then working for hours and hours on end in the sub-freezing temperatures. And he suffered from frostbite.
Oh, man.
But, I mean, he obviously made a recovery. He's fine. But that was the only injury to firefighters in this crazy fire, which is miraculous to me.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty ironic, honestly.
That you get frostbite at a fire?
That the only injury is frostbite in a fire. That's like hand to God stuff.
Yeah. John Epperly arrived at Mercy Hospital to take custody of his wife Elnora on Sunday, January 8th, the day after the fire. They returned to her mother's home, and John made every effort to shield Elnora from news of the fire, concerned that the trauma could cause her mental illness to worsen. However, Elnora insisted on listening to the radio and hearing reports of the fire. As she became more and more agitated, John made the decision to leave Elnora's mother's home and take Elnora back to their home, hoping that being back home would reduce Elnora's agitation. But it did not. Instead, Elnora began insisting to John that they call authorities because she had started the fire. John, of course, shared the view of Dr. Hollander and believed that his wife's confessions were nothing more than a symptom of her schizophrenia. She had many times expressed beliefs that horrific events, including earthquakes and fires around the world, were somehow caused by her actions.
Oh, poor dear lady.
He finally agreed to call authorities, thinking that they would understand the mental illness his wife was suffering from, and that she tended to take responsibility for things beyond her control, and after allowing her to confess, they would convince her that the fire wasn't her fault. On January 11th, investigator Harry Weinbrandt received a phone call. The call instructed him to travel to the Epperly home where a patient that had escaped the fire at St. Elizabeth's had confessed to setting the fire. When he arrived at the house and met Elnora, the first thing she asked him was, "Do you think I'm crazy?" And he explained that he couldn't know one way or another yet as he didn't know her, but he had no reason to think she was crazy. So Elnora told him during the subsequent interview, quote, "They tell me I'm nuts," unquote. And Elnora told him that she was responsible for the fire, and she told him how she'd done it, indicating that she had believed she was being intentionally kept from her husband John, and that something bad was going to happen to John if she didn't escape and get to him. At one point, Elnora seemed to slip into a trance during the interview. Her eyes seemed to focus off into the distance. The investigator wasn't sure whether to believe Elnora, but he was convinced enough that her story was a possibility that he asked the Epperleys if they would come down to the state attorney's office so that they could write out an official statement for Elnora to sign the following morning. And the couple agreed to report to his office at 10 a.m. the next day. However, Investigator Weinbrandt would not meet the Epperleys at the attorney's office at 10 a.m. because they didn't show up. So he drove over to their house to find out why they'd missed the meeting, only to find the house empty and the car missing from the driveway. So he set out to Elnora's mother's home, and when he arrived, Elnora's mother explained that the couple had spent the night at her house because after his visit, Elnora had become so agitated that John brought her over to spend the night. And the family ended up getting very little rest that night because Elnora was so agitated, and they had actually overslept, and that the couple had left just before the investigator arrived. So the investigator got back into his car and went back to the Epperleys' home, and he actually arrived there just as John and Elnora were arriving back home. And they were very apologetic and gave the investigator the same story that Elnora's mother had, that they had had no rest the night before because of Elnora's agitation, and that they just simply overslept, and so they agreed to come down to the attorney's office right then. Elnora explained how she'd had access to the lighter, John hadn't collected it back from her when he'd left, and the nurse hadn't known she had it, or she would have removed it when she took the cigarettes and matches from Elnora's room. And she told the investigators that she tossed it into the parlor on the first floor as she had escaped the building. Now, given Elnora's delusions caused by her schizophrenia, investigators weren't certain that they could believe her story. John certainly didn't believe his wife had set the fire. He believed her confessions were a result of her inability to parse reality from fiction. But investigators had found something John didn't know about. As they'd combed carefully through the wreckage of the building in the area of the first floor parlor, they found a silver cigarette lighter with the initials JWE engraved in the case, exactly where Elnora said she had tossed it. This was the cigarette lighter that had belonged to John, that his wife had retained possession of when he left that day, and she had used it to set the fire that would ultimately kill 40 patients and one nurse at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Investigators believed Elnora. However, this second interview was much more difficult than the one that had occurred the night before. Elnora seemed annoyed that they couldn't just use what she had said the night before and that she had to recount everything again. When they tried to get her to recount that she had believed that her husband was in danger and that's why she lit the fire, she refused to answer, only saying that she didn't think it was anyone's business why she did it. And when John at one point started to speak up to explain, she threatened to divorce him if he didn't shut his mouth right then. So he did.
Damn.
When asked if she understood what would happen to her as a result of her actions, Elnora flatly replied that she supposed she'd get the electric chair.
What?
But in 1950, Iowa didn't use the electric chair. Death sentences were carried out by hanging.
That's worse than I thought.
Based on Elnora's flat affect when answering, not just that question, but all of the questions, along with her refusal to admit that she was having hallucinations, that her husband was in danger that night, it almost seems like she was more afraid of being considered crazy than she was of being charged with murder. To John's utter shock and horror, his wife was arrested and taken to the jail to be detained for trial on Thursday, January 12th. She was charged with first-degree murder, and under state law, she would not be permitted bond. She would be locked up until trial. Immediately, John hired an attorney that then pled insanity for his client. While he was unable to have her transferred out of the jail to a mental hospital, he did at least succeed in having her moved to the hospital ward of the jail to await an evaluation by the absolutely horrifically named Sanity Commission.
This John's really sweet. He's a sweet character, man.
So this Sanity Commission did evaluate Elnora and determined that she was criminally insane, which prompted her release from the prison to be transferred to the state mental hospital where treatment would continue. When the coroner's inquest occurred, Dr. Hollander testified that Elnora's actions were the result of the insulin shock therapy she'd been subjected to, as well as the fact that she'd been locked in her room that night despite his recommendations that she not be locked in, and her schizophrenia had resulted from severe brain trauma she'd received during the car accident that had paralyzed her mother, and it was compounded by the stress of discovering she was sterile and wouldn't be able to have children. The jury quickly determined that Elnora was not of sound mind and thus issued a ruling of no bill, which means that the charges against her were essentially dropped. Now, we don't know what Elnora's continued treatment consisted of, but we do know that she was out of the hospital on conditional release 4 months later under the agreement that if she regressed, her husband would immediately notify authorities. Despite what the doctors had told Elnora about the condition of her womb and her inability to bear children, Elnora did actually go on to be a mother to 3 children. And then she became a grandmother and a great-grandmother. Elnora passed away in 2016 at the age of 88. Now, she was preceded in death by one of her 3 children, a daughter named Deirdre, and Deirdre died in a car accident when she was only 38. This seems especially tragic to me, considering that Elnora's schizophrenia was ruled by doctors to be the result of a car accident, and that same car accident had also left Elnora's mother paralyzed. Now, today, when people are found not guilty by reason of insanity, they are generally committed to a psychiatric hospital, and laws can vary by state. But for some states, like California, for example, they would be committed to a mental hospital for the duration of time that would be equal to the prison sentence if they had been competent to stand trial and were found guilty. Some states do allow release from mental facilities to which patients are committed once they've adequately proven they're no longer a threat to themselves or others, but the length of time they're committed can be extensive. It seems that criminal insanity was treated much lighter at the time than it is today, maybe because the psychological treatments to which people like Elnora were exposed were punishment enough. I don't know. The victims of the St. Elizabeth's fire were many, each of them with their own story, their own struggles, and a shared tragic ending. But they each live on. Their stories whisper to us from between the lines of requirements that institutional and healthcare occupancies like mental health facilities have to conform to today. Now, these facilities have requirements for fire alarm systems, sprinkler systems, fire extinguishers, limitations on interior finishes, requirements for compartmentation that include requirements to limit vertical pathways through which fire can travel from floor to floor. Healthcare occupancies are divided into compartments with fire resistance rated construction to allow occupants to be safely evacuated to other areas in the event of a fire. And emergency evacuation procedures designed to train staff on how to handle fire emergencies so that evacuations can be conducted swiftly and efficiently are required. And this is often overlooked when we talk about fire protection, but risk recognition is a big part of fire protection strategy. There was no evaluation procedures for St. Elizabeth's for risk reduction. There were no plans of who was responsible for what actions in the event of a fire. That's because no one anticipated that a fire would occur. They were blind to the risk. Risk recognition is so important in fire safety because it helps you develop appropriate procedures and helps to identify when things might impact those procedures. Fire protection isn't just fire alarms and fire sprinkler systems. It's a system of systems and processes and procedures that all work together to create a protection strategy. Everything from what we allow to be used as interior finish, to passive protection like fire resistance rated construction, and active protection like sprinkler systems, all the way up to the emergency procedures that exist so everyone knows what to do in the event of a fire. These are the things that we do today because of the women that died as a result of our good intentions and ignorance at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Those people were there to receive help, and our blindness to the risks of fire cost 40 of them and 1 nurse their lives. With their ultimate sacrifice, they have ended up helping us far more than we ever helped them. They've helped us to be wiser, they've made us safer, and they've shown us better ways to protect people. And that's the story of St. Elizabeth's Hospital on Crime to Burn. And while we still have so many things to learn about the brain and mental health care, there is help available. There are options and treatments that help millions of people each year with mental health struggles. Please don't suffer in silence. Help is available. If you're in the U.S. and having thoughts of self-harm or need help locating mental health services, please call or text 988 from any mobile phone, or call 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-TALK. You can also text HOME, HOME, to 741-741 to reach a live crisis counselor 24/7. So be sure to join us next week for a brand new case.
Oh yeah, I should probably settle in for the mental beatings.
I hear things.
Those things aren't real.
That guy is.
I need like a clothespin.
A clothespin?
Or something clothespin adjacent. It looks like I'm in hell or something, and I didn't want to really give that impression. Never really been in hell before. Been in places hell adjacent.
Right. Do you need help?
That's up for some debate. I was minding my own business.
Oh, I wasn't.
As usual.
I hear things. I see things. Hey, but...
They have medication for that. Well, I appreciate that you've got my bathroom best interests in mind.
Yeah, that's the problem with busy days. It's not enough drinking time. I think we should invite her over for dinner and...
break her ankles and hobble her and make sure she writes a book.
Keep her in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy how that conversation went from admiration to felony.
You are going in the naughty corner. Naughty. It was TikTok. I am now on TikTok. Like the fifth Blues Brother or something. Well, I like to think I'm on a mission from God. I'm making all this up as I go. I'm here to help you on your journey.
I don't remember anything about it. Not a damn thing.
That's too bad, but I've got a lot of popcorn and a lot of gourmet seasonings for that popcorn and a big old movie screen. I don't feel comfortable admitting that to anyone right yet. Yeah, I don't know if fabulous is a word I'd use. It was something all right. Say that again, please. What's his name?
Bear Grylls.
And one more time for the fans.
What, am I saying it wrong? What is it? No, I've always heard everyone say Grylls. Is it really Grills?
Am I really wrong about this?
I don't know. Hang on. How do you pronounce Bear Grylls? Oh, it might be Grills, because it's spelled Grills.
Bear Grylls.
I've been sounding like a moron for so long. I didn't know. I thought it was Grylls.
All right. Relax. Take a breath. There you go. Let it go. That's why I said I'm here to help you on your journey.
Thank God I heard somebody say epitome before the first time I said it.
I've said epitome for funsies just to grate on people's spinal nerves. And I notice the people that aren't offended by that, and then I hold them in lesser regard. You know, you got this internal way of sorting people, like a sorting hat.
The epitome of sorting hats. I feel dirty now. Okay, let's never admit it. It's our secret.
Hey,
when it gets done.
When I say I'm going to do something, there's no need to nag me every 6 months about it.
Okay. I like fluffy chicken butts and you like happy chicken sounds.
I should write them down. Take dictation. It's kind of naughty, though. You think it's naughty? And then titties and beer. Is that one thing or is that two things?
I don't know.
Write that down. Hell yeah, we're a great team.
But you had your fingers right in front of my face and the intrusive thoughts won. And so I just licked your fingers. In my defense, you'd been eating popcorn that had the seasoning salt on it. You offered me some and I didn't take any because I was so full from dinner. But then I thought, now's my chance to see how the seasoning salt tastes.
Really? You're in my circle of trust.
You're in my rhombus of... What's a synonym for trust? My rhombus of...
What rhymes with rhombus?
Justice.
Justice.
Well, two angles are acute and two angles are obtuse.
Well, everyone knows that about me.
Hang on.
Relax. Hey, go like this. Red raspberries. That's good enough. Please continue. That was fascinating.
Our episode talking about Centralia on the
Nice. On the what? On the
On the paella.
The paella. That sounds sexy.
Collaborations in the works, so follow us on social media and fall
All
down
the way down the
stairs. So talking about Centralia on the podcast Sasquatch and...
Sasquatch and Schmegma. Two great tastes. Tastes great.
Oh, Lord, this is why we don't record at night anymore.
And never go live. Ever.
Never going to be able to think of Sasquatch without thinking of Smegma now. Please be sure to check out our episode talking about Centralia. Sasquatch. Damn it. I'm going to do this. I'm a professional.
If you'd like your podcast name ruined, please send your...
Christina, I'm sorry. The initial fire crews raced into the building, hoping to... I forgot
fart
to...
out the fire.
I didn't let you swallow, I realized, so I stopped.
I'm getting much better at swallowing. It takes practice. At first you do it clumsily and noisily. After a while, you just learn how to subtly let the liquid slide down the back of your throat. Observe. Absolutely silent. Like a ninja.
You want to bang me. You want to bang me. You want to bang me.
You want to bang me.
If you haven't seen that video on TikTok, it's fan-freaking-tastic. Ooh, that's what we should look for tonight, too, before we watch
Bird.
trash TV. No. We should see if there's a new Zay Frank yet.
Oh, I love Zay Frank.
I love Zay Frank, too.
I want to meet Zay Frank. No, you should never meet your heroes. Damn it. Hold on, I'm going to try again. So you got two schools of thought. You've got if you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, then you're crazy school of thought. And then you've got if at first you don't succeed, try again school of thought. Which one do you think you fall under?
Because I always assume that the first few times I fail, it was my fault somehow. Like, I just wasn't doing it right.
Well, I think that acceptance is the first
criteria for commitment.
Let's say that on a down note.
Just inches in front of the firefighters' faces. As
Firefighters?
The firefighters' faces.
Darth Firefighter.
And flames and heat far too
You said heat fart.
And ironically, the corridor.
Ironically, the coroner had only... No. Oh, was it supposed to be coroner?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I called him a corridor.
Oh, well, I thought it was supposed to be a corridor. Would you like to fill my ass, Lorraine?
I would.
Yeah.
Soon, the coroner... Why can't I say coroner?
No one puts that dude in a corner.
Systems, fire extinguishers, limitations on interior finishes, cats that claw couches.
Well, my beer's empty.
Oh dear.
And my ass is asleep.
My ass is asleep too. And we forgot our stadium seats today at the sports ball event.
Oh, I know.
And my butt was hurting there. And then we went to the 2025 Georgia Bigfoot Conference, where the chairs were equally hard. We didn't stay very long just because of other stuff we had going on, but we did get to stick our heads in and meet some cool people. And yeah, Friday night they had a welcome reception at a brewery. Brewery. Friday night they had a welcome reception at a brewery. And why can't I say that normally all of a sudden?
I don't know.
They had a welcome reception at a place that makes beer.
A brewery.
My hair looks fabulous. And I told her, I was like, see how clean your hair is? See how soft it is? And she touched mine and she goes, why isn't yours soft? Man, kids are brutal. It's because my hair is gray under all the hair color. Thank you.
I gotta get some blood in my ass.
All right, we're done. Until next week.
Looking for your next true crime podcast? Then consider checking out my show, Truly Twisted, wherever you get your podcasts. Hi, my name is Alicia Watson, and each Thursday I will be bringing you a twisted story that is always victim-focused and fact-based. My goal is simple, bringing a voice to the voiceless. So be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at It's Truly Twisted. And for more on my show and other amazing creators, visit fireeyesmedia.com. And in the meantime, remember, you are wanted, you are loved, and you deserve to be here. And I'll see you there.
Fire Eyes Media.